Okay, so in this segment, we're going to try and explain how they fixed the problem with the Pythagorean comma, or the out of tuneness. Remember that if we had a note, let's see if I can find this here on the video. If we had a note right there, and we used a simple 2-to-1 ratio, we would get the note that's in tune with it right there, and it would sound perfect. But if we used tuning by fifths and went up a fifth and then down an octave and then up a fifth and down an octave and got all the way, then we finally got to our last note here and then could go up a fifth to get to this note right here, that new note, which is supposed to be in tune, would be too high. So our tuning method fails us because of math, so that we know that this is in tune, and when we tune all the other notes to get the internal notes inside, we end up with a note that's too high, and it sounds bloody awful. It's horrible. So in singing groups and things like that, they would just adjust and pull it down, and that's fine. But instruments needed to be tuned. Even if you make that adjustment, that means the distance between this and all these other notes that come underneath it here sounds terrible, right? And sounds out of tune. That's okay, because if you're using a scale that needs to be in a certain key, you choose certain notes, and the impact of that would be minimized because you don't use all the notes all the time, and you can avoid ones that sound bad, and you can make it work. But it means you don't have access to all the notes all the time and making it sound right. It also means that you have to pre-tune your instruments, and so you can't play other songs in different keys or using different scales or starting points, because the notes that would not be used in this case may become very important if we started in a different location. The relationships change. So we were limited by our tuning system. It meant that if you wanted to write music in more than one key, start in one key or using a scale and then modulate to a different place, then it would sound bad in that way. And it's even harder for choirs because everybody then has to adjust on the fly. You're using your ears only, and you're trying to detune things. So during the Renaissance period, they came up with a bunch of different things. They said, well, what if we move this guy down and then this other important note here down a little bit as well, and sort of, different kind of accommodations that they made. And they have different tuning systems called mean tuning and just tuning, and all these kind of things. And if you're an expert in the field, if you've been playing historical music for decades, and you've gotten to professional level, then you know about this, and you may even prefer to play the music in the original tuning that it was. It sounds a little strange to our ears today, but you go like, no, this is the way that they made it, this is the way that they wanted it to sound, and you reproduce it sort of authentically. But like I said, again, the further away you got from the original scale that you were using, the worse it would sound. By the time we hit the Baroque period, somebody has figured out something very clever. And part of it is not just trial and error, but part of it is they got better at measuring frequency and things as well. So this is our in tune octave, right? This is our out of tune, slightly sharp or high octave. What somebody figured out how to do was, if they took the distance that this was high right there, okay? Now before they just shoved that note down, but what they did was they said, let's divide this into 12 parts, right? Because there are 12 notes between here and there, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, right? Okay. Then what they said was, if we take this and divide this part that we're out, and it's not that much, but it's enough to make you go, ugh, right? And divide it by 12, that means that we could move this one down a 12th, and that one down a 12th, and that one down a 12th, and that one down a 12th. And you can't hear the difference. The average person can't tell, okay? You move them all down a 12th of this distance here, and all of a sudden, it all fits, and you can barely tell, right? You move them all down a twelfth of this amount right there. Then all of a sudden this lines up with this, and they're all equidistant. All the notes from one note to the next note to the next note doesn't have any of these weird adjustments that you've made that will make it sound bad, right? And what does that mean? That means that you can start on any note, use any scale, and your pre-tuned instrument will sound in tune, no matter what key or what they call tonality scale that you're using. And that means now you can write a piece that's in the key of C, and in the key of D, and in the key of G, and the key of F, and F sharp, and any key you want, and the instruments are tuned in a way that that will sound fine rather than sound horrible the further away you get from the original tuning of, that they did. It also means that you can write pieces of music that change key in the middle of the piece of music, and that's interesting. In other words, we went from like in our day, it's like going from analog to digital. Yeah, I guess so. When I was a kid in school, the teachers would use these double carbon pieces of paper, and it would have like two sheets on it, and one would be like purple, and you'd run it through chemicals in a ditto machine that they'd run around, and you could make reproductions of things that way. Fine, good. They could it's like they could make a piece of music. You could make copies, but it still was full analog. You had to write everything on there. You couldn't print anything. Once we went digital with printers and word processors, our capabilities to do things, documents became, and make copies of them, mass production became, just exponentially more powerful. So music pre-Baroque period doesn't change keys, or doesn't change keys but once. And it doesn't play in exotic and strange keys to start with, or scales, because you'd have to retune, instruments every time. And some of them can't be recalibrated when you make a trumpet or a flute or something like that. You've already drilled your holes and made your intonation choices and things. So this is huge. This is groundbreaking. And once you have this capability, composers start writing much, much more complex piece of music that have these relationships. We start in this key, then we go to that key, then we go to this key, and then we wind our way back through a bunch of other keys and finally get home again. And the idea of structure of pieces of music become, just completely different. Not to offend any flat earthers out there, but if your worldview changes from it's a flat earth and you're going to fall off the edge to no, you can travel around the globe and get back on the other side, and you can go in any direction and things like that. The possibilities from that, grow exponentially. Bach writes the well-tempered clavier. What does that mean? Temper means to adjust or change something, and what that clavier means keyboard. He writes a book of pieces called Music for the Well-Tuned Keyboard, and he writes each piece is in a different key, and he goes through every possible key that you could be in. So this system is called equal temperament, right? It means that you have tempered or adjusted each of the 12 notes inside the octave equally. And it allows us to play music in any key and sound in tune on our instruments, and have pieces of music that change key or tonality in the middle. So now when you go back to the previous page in the chapter and it says, so, we change tonality, we modulate. Now you understand that this is not just something that happened, but it's a technical innovation that happened that allowed our aesthetics to change. Also, changing key is a representation of love of drama, which is one of those three main tenets of the Baroque period, right? Grandiose dimensions, love of drama, and religious intensity. In fact, you could say it's another way that enables love of drama, because if you can write pieces of music that change key, or groups of pieces of music that are in different keys, you can make much, much bigger structures without it becoming boring. So that's grandiose dimensions as well.